Today, our masterclass is all about how to run a DE&I exchange. And I'll start with introducing myself and the other faces that you're seeing here as well. So my name is Tila Beischer, and I'm your host today. I'm a customer success manager here at Thoughtexchange. So I primarily work with partners in the education sector to help them to plan and manage exchanges, including working with results. And I have a couple guests with me today who are here to bring their expertise. So I have Dennis Carpenter, who is our Director of K-12 Anti-Racism and Equity. Hi, Dennis.
Hello.
Perfect. And we have joining us soon Karen Milne, who is our Head of Anti-Racism, Equity, and Inclusion as well. They've joined to really offer their expertise and advice about these exchanges. We'll be hearing from them throughout the class, and then we're also going to have a Q&A at the end. You may see one other person here, and that is our colleague Amelia, who's going to be monitoring the chat today. Feel free to pop in now and say hello to her. And Amelia, if you don't mind resending the link to Karen, she just needs it there too. So if you can pop on and do that as well, that'd be amazing. All right, so here's exactly what we're talking about today. Today is intended to be a really practical, tangible session for you. People and organizations all across the world are being called to dismantle systemic and institutional racism. There's also many marginalized groups of people who continue to require the attention of your organization. Some ways that people experience othering and marginalization in the workplace can be based on national or ethnic origin, color, religion, age, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, marital status, family status, disability, genetic characteristics, convictions, and others as well. So what we wanted to do was to think about how can you create a diverse, inclusive, and equitable organization. And at Thoughtexchange, that starts with listening. It starts with understanding and hearing the challenges of your people that they're currently experiencing so that you can help them to address them effectively through meaningful actions. Exchanges provide an inclusive and equitable platform to bring people together to create such change. Perfect. And now more than ever is the time to be having these difficult and important conversations. And that's really why we wanted to offer today's class to you. So what we're going to be talking about today are how to think about your objectives and your goals for these types of exchanges. What do you need to consider with your planning and your consideration? And then we're going to spend some time in the product doing a tutorial. So going over resources for question design, thinking about your survey questions, thinking about moderation, and then also thinking really critically about reporting. How can you share results back in a way that informs meaning? And so we have 30 minutes booked for today. I think we can do it. We have a lot of information to cover, but we can go through that all together. And we are going to have that Q&A exchange at the end of today's session. And what I would love to do is to ask that if you're available to stay on for longer, we're available to stay on and answer as many questions as we can. If not, we are recording today and we will send you the recording. And I did see that Karen was just able to hop online. So Karen, if you would like to come and just say hello to everyone.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to have you here in this conversation. Running DE&I exchanges has really changed the way I do this work. And so I'm really glad you're here and happy to jump in to answer questions as you go through today's discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. And we do have the chat. So if you have questions, you can pop them in there. Amelia's monitoring it. But if you want to save them for the exchange at the end, then everyone else can share and rate your questions as well. So let's start talking about objectives. And as with every exchange, this is where we start thinking about the planning process. We want to think about what is your why. And so for these exchanges, it could look like a few different things. Maybe you're trying to create a safer space to foster open dialogue. You're trying to identify gaps in resources so that your team can create more professional development opportunities or identify what conversations even need to happen at your organization. Maybe you are trying to identify how systematic racism shows up in your organization and what do you need to do to address that and to resolve that. Could be a combination of these. It could be many other reasons as well. But getting clear on where your organization is at and what conversation that you need to start with is the strongest way to have a really great exchange. And I wanted to give you a couple questions to prompt that thinking. So when you're thinking about why are you running this exchange, where does your organization need to start? Think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and kind of that idea of psychological and physical safety that's at the base. Is that somewhere where people need to start? And you need to have that conversation so that you can build upwards to transforming and visioning. Think really critically about that, because remember, with an exchange, people are able to enter their thoughts in response. And so they may just have to have that conversation anyways. Another important thing when you're thinking about your why is, why are you running this for your participants? And what do you want them to get out of it? Remember that exchanges are inclusive practices in that people are able to share and rate the thoughts of others and see everything really transparently. And so that becomes an experience for your participants in participating. They are learning from each other, they're rating the thoughts of others, they're talking with people who they might not always talk with and hearing perspectives outside of their perspectives. And that can really build some empathy and some learning as well. So is that a really important component for you? And how can you then bring different stakeholders in? How can you bring as many people in as possible so that people really have that empathy building moment? Another question that goes along with that is, who are those stakeholders? So who are the people that you want to involve in the process? Are you wanting to start with your staff? If you're in education, are you wanting to start with your district community? Are you wanting to start with your customers? Maybe if you're a customer-facing organization, what does that look like? And what are the different ways that you need to communicate with them in order to get them into this exchange and sharing and rating thoughts? Perfect. And then the final question prompt is the one that you're seeing on the slide. I think this is the most important thing to think about when you think about your objectives. It's accountability. And so that is saying, we are not running this conversation for the sake of running this exchange. It's not something that we're doing just for the sake of doing it for itself. It's because we want it to inform action. We want it to be tangible. We want people to be able to measure progress and to see what comes out of this. And so how are you going to hold yourself and your team accountable to actioning these results? And also, how are you going to be accountable for the fact that these exchanges cannot exist in singular? And by what I mean is, one conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion doesn't solve the diversity, equity, and inclusion needs. And so are you willing to commit to many exchanges, many conversations to really implement this work? Karen and Dennis, I'm curious if you have any thoughts about why or objectives that stand out to you at the end of that.
Yeah, I've been running a few of these with different clients, and I really like the image of the Russian dolls, where you have kind of like your idea of D&I work and D&I conversations, but recognizing that there's multiple layers and levels to them, and that even when you're trying to identify training on D&I, there's so many different topics that you could run an entire thought exchange just on what kind of training do you need, what kind of topics do you want us to cover, and finding people who run across those topics and thoughts. So just to say that, I really resonate with what you're saying around, this is not a one-time conversation. It's not a one-off thought exchange. There is a series of discussions that needs to happen that gets us to the heart of what will make a difference, what matters, and how we can move the dial forward.
Yes, I think you all have hit the nail on the head. The only thing that I'll add, and Karen hit on it, is this notion of iteration, is that it keeps going and it keeps going, and it's okay to expect and accept non-closure at the end of one exchange, knowing that you'll be moving into something else in another iteration. So good stuff.
I love that too. It's also the idea that we don't have all the answers right now, and we can't expect to have them all, so we can build upon them iteratively. All right, well, let's think then too about planning and communications as well. And so when you're thinking about planning any exchange, you're starting by identifying your topic, your objectives, your stakeholder groups. You're thinking about what survey questions do I need to ask to make some quantitative data that I can accompany my qualitative data. You're thinking about how am I doing my communications to reach out to as many people as possible. And my biggest tip for you is to start planning your awareness and communications pieces really early in the process. The earlier that you can get stakeholders excited about this work, the more likely that they are to participate in the longevity, so in that iterative process as well. And that will ultimately mean that you have higher participation, which means more people in the organization are able to really feel heard and add their voices to this as well. Another piece with that is to think about who on your team is supporting you. So who is going to support you with moderation? Who's supporting you with reach outs? If you're thinking about reaching out, for example, maybe you're going to run a multi-language exchange and you know that there are language groups in your organization or community that you don't always hear with. Who are those liaisons that you're able to work with to get them to champion participating in the exchange? Really think about how you can leverage connections. And that also brings up a question too, is do you or can you partner with any activists, diversity and inclusion educators, practitioners, or leaders within marginalized groups in your stakeholder body to provide guidance on the exchange questions, the messaging, and the tone of communications? Doesn't need to sit in silo with yourself. If you can make it a collaborative exercise, then it's more likely to really resonate with everyone as well. That could also be who can you champion with as well. So do you have a student group that is leading a lot of anti-racism and diversity and equity work? Could you partner with them to get more participation in the exchange and to hear more student voice? Do you have a DE&I specialist in your organization who you could work with to help you build the questions and the structure as well? Another thing to consider as well are your expectations. And so we touched on this a little bit in the last slide talking about objectives, but really, what are your expectations for what might come up in the conversation? Do you sense any areas of alignment? Do you think that there's any gaps that are going to be talked about? Knowing what might come up can sometimes help you to prepare communications for that as well. Perfect. So Karen and Dennis, any thoughts on partnerships and expectations and that idea that we talked about as well about being right or not knowing what's going to come up?
Spot on. Well done, Tila.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a few things. So number one of the things that holds people back from doing a DE&I exchange is I'm not the expert. You don't need to be an expert to ask the question, what can we do better? What can we do differently? How can we build on our successes? So don't worry about feeling like you have to have the expertise or you have to know how to respond to questions. This really is a collective exercise and a collective conversation. And when we frame the question appropriately, given the group and given what's going on, what happens is you start to see solutions and ideas coming from that conversation that really help generate what your roadmap looks like, what your strategy pillars should be, how you should be taking action. So even as someone who's worked in this field for 20 years, I don't have all the answers, but I know how to generate questions that help me get ideas from people about what matters to them and what they want to see in the roadmap or the next activities.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you. And that leads perfectly into the next area that we're going to talk about, which is asking the right questions and designing the exchange. So we're going to move now into a bit of a product tutorial, thinking about really critically, what are those pieces that you need to focus on to have a really successful exchange and to, as Karen said, to get the roadmap to come out of it, to get the thoughts and the concerns to come out of the exchange. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move into two different spaces. And we do have education partners here and we have our corporate partners here as well. So we have a lot of collaborative learning that can happen here as well. And what we can do is we can look here as well. We're going to start looking at the Exchange Gallery. And the Exchange Gallery, if you have not explored it yet, is a library of exchange templates or resources for you to start with. And the reason that I recommend starting in the Exchange Gallery is that you're able to really explore some wording of questions that might get you to where you want to go with your first exchange. And so I've just clicked on Create and then Exchange Gallery, and you can see here we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion area. And we have anti-racism and diversity, equity, and inclusion modules. You just click on Explore here, and then you're going to find some templates. So a huge variety of questions available to you here to start with. You can always edit these questions. So if you're thinking, what are some important perspectives we should consider regarding diversity, equity, and belonging? but you want to change it to say, what are some important perspectives we should consider regarding diversity, equity, and belonging as we're working from home this year, then you can do that. So use these as a starting point to really learn the language structures that you can use with the questions and to get some inspiration. So as I mentioned, this is the education one too. And you'll find as well that there's some specific student questions as well, some details about district language as well. But we do also have a corporate or a non-education exchange gallery as well. And if you look at that, and I'm just going to look at that now together, we have the same modules, so anti-racism and diversity, equity, and inclusion, but the language is really tailored to the needs of the non-education sector as well. So you might find some really strong interest here and some strong question ideas as well. All you do is click on Create Exchange to actually set the exchange up itself. And then if we were going to, I've actually set up a sample exchange for us to look through as well. Karen did point out as well to me this morning that we're looking at improving those questions in the exchange gallery. So we're looking at how can we make them even more expansive and have exactly, I just saw a question come up in the chat about have different DE&I groups available there. We're absolutely looking at that work. Exchange Gallery is still in beta mode too. So if you have questions that you think would be amazing, you have topics that you want to see there, reach out and let us know and we're able to do that with you. Perfect. So I wanted to go through a sample exchange here as well so that you could get a sense of what does this look like and what do I need to consider. If you haven't seen this before, this is the exchange draft screen, and these are the different components that you go through to really set up an exchange. So you start with the question, and that is where we started in the exchange gallery, or you can always look on our website. We have many resources available to you there. And the other component too is an introduction. And I think a written introduction and a video introduction are some of the most important pieces that you can do for your exchange design. This is your opportunity to give people some context and to speak to clear next steps. And so what you want to be doing is to be including your participants or as owners in this process as well. And so if you ever need some support with writing your introduction, if you click on this little question mark icon and you look at this help widget that pops up, you can actually search for resources from our help site. So we have a diversity and equity template that has a sample introduction that you can use, which I had just copy pasted in here. And it has lots of tips for you there. So you can start there with your introduction. Also, if you're running a diversity, equity, and inclusion exchange, you'll likely want to use multi-language as well, so people can participate in whatever language they prefer to. And we have some amazing masterclasses all about using multi-language. The simplest thing to do is to turn this toggle on, and then people can participate in any language that's translatable by Google Translate. Makes it really inclusive as well. The other detail that I want to go through with you are survey questions. And so if you've used survey questions before, you're familiar with them in two different ways. One, they are a means to gather some demographic info. So you could get a sense of what department are people from, maybe you want to know what ethnicity that people are so that you can start thinking about how inclusive am I. Or you can get kind of traditional survey style metrics out of using these by using something like a Likert scale. So see that I set up some sample ones here saying, how diverse do you feel we are as an organization? And then I have 1 to 5. How inclusive do you feel that we are as an organization? And then I have 1 to 5 as well. And the benefit of using survey questions in this method is that you are able to get some really clear quantifiable data as a baseline or a benchmark. So you can imagine that if you were running these exchanges over time and you were working on these projects, you're working on changing your organizational culture, you're implementing the things that you hear in the exchanges, and you're asking these survey questions over time, you're going to be able to compare and track any progress as well. And that can be a really powerful way to measure the success of your exchanges themselves too in accompanying with your work. Karen and Dennis, I'm curious if there's anything about survey questions that's standing out to you.
So when I look at the matter of survey questions, it becomes extremely important to know holistically, not in an individual way, who your participants are. And there's lots of opportunity to do that. And I continue to be impressed with the equity expression that comes by way of the different languages that we're able to manipulate as a company. And that becomes very, very valuable from an inclusivity standpoint.
Yes, and I would say that the survey questions are really great because for organizations that have several different departments, or they're located in different places, or you're working at different levels of the organization, like senior leadership, management, frontline, this is the place where you can ask the right questions that enable you to then break that data up so that you can see where are the differences, where are the similarities, where do we see common threads, and what's unique about each of those groups. So thinking ahead about how you want to use the data and how you want to analyze it is very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you to both of you for that. The last detail that I want to highlight when you're thinking about running an anti-racism or a DE&I exchange is to really consider moderation. And so I want to challenge you to think about how much transparency can I bring to my moderation approach and my moderation settings. And the reason for that is that the last thing that people want to feel when they are participating in an exchange that is really vulnerable is censored. And so if you're going to use moderation, and that might be required depending on who you're reaching out to, be cautious to really be on top of adding thoughts back in, or even leaving thoughts in until you remove them. Really protecting people's feeling of seeing themselves in the exchange and not feeling censored is one of the strongest ways that you can build trust in the exchange process itself. And I think that's a really important thing too with conversations like this right now. And so if you're going to, for example, use the machine moderation features, which are algorithms that can review different thoughts and then flag thoughts that are either inappropriate or identify a person, and you can choose if they're left in or removed from the conversation. If you're going to be using the identifying thoughts, think about the fact that it's looking for words like first names. So if someone says something like Martin Luther King Jr., it might flag that thought out and be removed from the conversation. So think about that really critically, how you want to monitor it. If you do have more questions about moderation, we do have help articles embedded into the moderation screen, and you can watch videos as well. And that can also be something that you reach out to your Thoughtexchange team about as well, to get us to help you and coach you in making sure that your moderation is all set up. Perfect. So those are really the details of creating the exchange. We're running a little bit short on time because there's so much to talk about with this topic. So I'm really quickly just going to show you 2 details about reporting back. And so we see reporting back as one of the most important parts of running an exchange. It's that people want to hear that their voices were heard. They want to be validated. They want to know that action is coming out of participating in the exchange, or they just want to know what's next. Maybe it's, we heard that professional development was an important topic that came out of this exchange, so we're going to run a professional development exchange to hear what else you need to learn. And so I'm going to challenge you all on this call that if you run an exchange about this topic, that you either use slides or the summary report to share results back with your stakeholders. And if you haven't seen slides yet, this is essentially a PowerPoint slide of what happened in the exchange. So you can export it and then give any presentations. You could talk about, this is the word cloud that came up, or these are the different themes that we identified. Remember, you can do custom theming work as well. And then with summary reports, these are an opportunity to create a custom results website that you can share out with your participants. You could even post it on your organization landing page. If you're a school district, maybe you post this on a district landing page. Maybe you put it on social media as well. However, you've reached out to welcome people in to participate. And they're able to see some information about what happened in the exchange, and you can customize this. So this is an example exchange that we ran actually at our virtual event last week, all about equity and education. And our leaders actually went through and responded to all of the thoughts, or responded to the top thoughts. And so you can see that in that they are practicing and demonstrating visual listening as well, so that the people who participated are able to be honored and to have their thoughts heard as well. The other detail that this report does really well, and oh, sorry, let me go back there, the back button, is that they do customize exactly what came up too. There's always some sample text in this area, but I would love it if you're all able to add some next steps in there. Build a clarity of where you're at in the journey. How did the results change where you're going next, and be really clear about that too. Karen and Dennis, any thoughts about reporting, about sharing results back before we move into the Q&A?
I know we are running short on time, but I just want to mention the importance of reporting back and validating your participants. And there are several ways to do this. It's building on top thoughts. It's bringing attention to those thoughts that are in direct contrast with each other. And there's an opportunity to do that through reporting. And also the opportunity to practice what I call virtual listening, is to respond in real time to some of the thoughts. So there are many opportunities to validate your participants. And I think that's extremely important when people give of themselves in terms of time, energy, and emotional commitment to difficult topics by way of the exchange.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love about this tool is that whenever I work with it with a group of people, I always recommend that we share the entire report with all of the thoughts back to everybody who participated, because often what happens is you'll get a bunch of thoughts and then you'll only see the top ones, or you'll only see the ones that are being prioritized. But this way you're practicing active inclusion and also full transparency, which builds trust and which allows people to go back and look at different thoughts and to think about things, because people need time to process. And so when they have the report available to them, they can go back, they can look at different things, they can find observations and talk further about the findings. So it's really important to maintain that transparency by making sure not only that we report back, but that we make that available to everyone if possible.
Wonderful. All right, well, we zipped through all of that information a little bit quickly, but there are a lot of master classes on how to set up all of those details. And this is something that we are committing to offering more resources on. So you'll hear more from us in the future. What I want to do now is move into a Q&A period. I know we're at the end of our 30 minutes. So if you need to hop off, we will be sending the recording and it will include the Q&A period too. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to move into a presenter mode exchange. And so if you on the calls haven't participated in a presenter mode exchange, this is something any exchange can be run in this way. Really powerful for Zoom meetings, for webinars, and it's a way to hear from everyone in the room. So I would love to hear, what are your questions? What are your thoughts and questions about running your own DE&I exchange? And then we're going to go through and spend some time talking through the top thoughts. You can join in 3 ways. So you can either use your phone and join using the QR code, or you can go to tejoin.com and type in this 9-digit code, or I'm also going to post the link into the chat as well. If you're having any issues getting in, just let us know and Amelia will support you as well. Just post in the chat. And we're going to spend about 4 minutes on this. You can see there's a timer here. So I'm going to click on play and welcome you all in. Hardest part about running these live exchanges is not talking all the way through it, so you all have time to participate. So I'm actually going to mute myself for a minute or two. This is the exchange that we just ran. We're going to share the report with you afterwards so that you can get a sense of what the reports look like too. And I'm actually going to click on stop so that we don't see things shifting too much. Sometimes if you're doing this and you don't click on stop, the thoughts are going to shift while you're going through it. So let's talk through some of these top ones that came up here as well. So this first thought, Karen and Dennis, I'm really curious to hear your reaction to this and any advice that you may offer. So it's a concern about supporting triggered participants, that trauma may surface if people are asked to contribute thoughts or experiences.
Absolutely. I tend to agree that that is a possibility. I think from a technical standpoint, there's an opportunity to address this up front in the introduction prior to running the thought, when you give the background and the introduction of the thought, surfacing that as a possibility and allowing for permission for people to engage as they personally and emotionally see fit, and to back away from the exchange until which point they are ready, if that even happens. So I think that that's an opportunity for that to be addressed on the front end, would be my initial thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could do that live as well if you were hosting the exchange live in the room as well. You could speak to that.
And I also think it's really important to give people some direction about who they can speak to or where they can go once that's triggered, because you don't want to leave them with that to work it out on their own. And so, remind them if EAP is an option, remind them if, there are people that are on staff or available to support them with anything that comes up for them afterwards.
Perfect. All right, well, let's look at this next one that came up here. How do you increase participation? I see this come up in almost every single masterclass. I think this is the question for every exchange. And what I can speak to from a CSM voice is that increasing participation is helping your participants see their voices as valuable in the exchange. When they see that action is going to come from this, when they see that their voice is a valuable contributor, they're more likely to participate. Karen and Dennis, I'm curious if you have any creative ideas on this as well, specifically in the DE&I sector.
Yeah, what I normally do is I think it's important for them to see the roadmap of how this conversation is going to feed into and lead into a bigger process. And so when they can see those those dots connecting, they know that what they're contributing is going towards something. And it's not just another one of those surveys you put out there that we answered and you didn't listen to, right? So that's really important that we make that distinction.
Yes, I totally agree. I think it speaks to my earlier point about iteration. And when people can see evidence of that iteration taking place. And also there was a comment that I saw about dealing with negative thoughts. And I think when the organization shows vulnerability and courage around saying, hey, we honor this negative thought, it was placed into the conversation. And then through reporting, participants get to see how widespread or not said thoughts are. But that is the leadership piece relative to vulnerability in this space, and honoring when you hear those voices, because ultimately the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion for each of us is an individual journey. And we pick people up where they are on the journey. So if the journey begins for them in a place that appears to be negative, we honor that as we continue this important work.
All right, let's move on to the next top thought here. If you're just getting started with your diversity and equity work, what do you recommend as the topic question to get information about where to focus? Equity is broad, and I would like to drill out to focus my and my teammates' efforts.
I think it's really important to bring that question to the group and ask them, where do you think we should focus? Where do you think we should start? What are the things you think that we should work on? Because sometimes we get stuck on the language and, the thoughts are already there. People know what matters to them and they know where they want to see action. And so you can come back to the equity piece, but I would start by asking them, what matters to you? Where do you want us to start?
Great.
Yeah.
I tend to agree. I think it's so organization specific. When getting to that point, the good thing is we have capacity organizationally here at Thoughtexchange to assist with what that initial thought might look like. And it really has to do with where the organization is on its journey. It's this matter of where are we, and I like to use the words on the courage continuum in this space. And if you've already done some things organizationally to build courage in this space, then you can probably start with a question that feels more rich as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you have not started as much work, then you may start with a question that feels more benign, but it will get the work started in terms of the first iteration. So that's something that you do strategically. And I think we can assist with supporting any organization in that effort.
All right, so Teresa's looking for, she just added into the chat, she's looking for an example of that question. Anything that's coming to mind, Karen or Dennis? Perfect. Oh, Karen just added, we have the number of questions in the diversity, equity, and inclusion gallery, and the Thoughtexchange team can help you narrow it down as you plan. Yeah. And so what I would say too is that might be a really good place to start with exploring it too, and then reach out to your Thoughtexchange team to see if they could think about where your organization is at. What are those things that you need to be thinking about? Who are the key players to help you with planning? All right.
I just want to say it really depends on where your organization is at. That will determine what the question needs to be to open the conversation, because in some organizations there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of anger, people are emotional, and they don't want to talk about what can we do. They want to talk about why do I feel the way I feel. And so the question you ask depends on what's going on for your particular organization, and the team can help you narrow that down as you work on your own DE&I planning for that first question.
Wonderful. All right, well, let's move on to the next thought here. Are you able to have back and forth conversations using Thoughtexchange? In previous DE&I conversations, the ability to instantly respond to each other has been incredibly important. So people are able to rate the thoughts of others, which is the ability to respond to each other, but they're not able to comment on the thoughts of others. You could imagine that if you were running a live exchange, so maybe you are doing like what we're doing today as a group, you could actually have a conversation about what came up all together. And that could be a really powerful place to start if that's a goal of yours as well. Another opportunity are to use leader comments, and those are a way to add a comment in response to a thought. So that would be your way to say, I heard you and I have this question still, or I heard you and we're going to take that forward as well. Karen and Dennis, any other ideas that you have there too?
I think the opportunity is really when we unpack this with the group. So everybody's done a thought exchange like we have, they've given all their thoughts. And then we discuss, what does this thought mean? How does it resonate? Why do we think this one had very different opinions? And that's where we have that dialogue around specific thoughts, more than individual comments being written under each thought. That's how I've used it.
Wonderful. All right, so we can move on to the next one, and maybe this is where we'll leave it just because we're at about 15 minutes past our time book. So thank you to everyone. This is a strong question to end on. What are some common pitfalls to avoid when trying to incorporate more DE&I in an exchange?
Yes, I'll begin by saying, do not let it be a one-time event in your organization. I've seen organizations, they have an exchange, and when people give of themselves in this conversational space, they have to see evidence of next steps. Where are we going with this? Where do we take it from here? That's why I think transparency is key. I think planning together with the team, because ultimately we may not know what the next step is, but communicate it. Communicate back with your team and say, we're going to explore and take the next steps together, but they must see evidence of the continued work. If not, you get this sentiment that we've all heard before. Yeah, they put this out to pacify us, but nothing's going to happen. And nothing's going to change. And that's what you do not want to see in your organization in terms of keeping your inclusion, diversity, equity initiatives alive and well.
And I would add to that, it's really important because often this work gets filtered up to the top for decisions to be made. It's really important that we honor what the community and the group have said about what is important. So if you're sitting at an executive level and you've got 10 thoughts that have all received a lot of weight, don't go to the thoughts that haven't, because they're easier to implement. You know, we have to either address why we're not addressing the ones that have been raised, or take action on the ones that have been raised, even if they make us uncomfortable and they're not the direction we wanted to go in. That's so important because it's part of building trust, and it shows that we're listening and taking what we're hearing seriously.
Yeah, that's a very wise way to wrap up. So we are going to go through this report, and we will answer more of the questions, and we'll share it out with all of you today. And we'll also share the recording. I want to give a huge thank you to Karen and Dennis for joining us today, for hopping online to offer their advice and their expertise. And just to remind you all that we here at Thoughtexchange are happy to partner with you on supporting you with these exchanges and making sure that you feel confident running them. So you'll have a lot of resources following up. We'll send you a follow-up email. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for the bonus time as well, and have wonderful rest of your Mondays. Thanks.